that had some kind of commercial aspect to it. Those became statutory corporations. But then we also have a history of how statutory corporations function. And people complain all the time about the fact that they don't file financial statements. It goes on and on. Each administration or each person who expresses a concern will say they haven't filed, but they're not up to date. But then you just continue saying that every year or every 5 years or whatever, they're never up to date. The other thing is that with a statutory corporation, what happens is that, of course, the whole board changes whenever there's a change of government. And what I think the conclusion that I have come to now, there's some ministers who would actually ensure that they have a permanent secretary sitting on those statutory corporations to ensure that you still have the oversight of the civil service. But of course, that's not necessary. This is if you have a minister who understands the role that a good civil service plays. Now, I will segue to make a little point about the civil service. I recall having discussions with, sometime I was in South America and there was somebody doing research, and Barbados came up as an issue as to why Barbados was so stable. And she pointed out to me that in her research, one of the very important things for us is our civil service, that you attract quality people, the politicians come and go, but you have high-level, high-quality civil servants working for the country who, yes, they might have their political, they go out and vote, they might support a party, but they understood that when they're in their role, when the minister came, that they were supposed to guide and support that minister, whether they voted for the party or not. And she identified in her studies that that was one of the very important things that kept Barbados stable. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that there has been over time, and maybe it started with when His Excellency Errol Barrow said there's an army of occupation. But I know that over time there has been this a campaign against the civil service. And, I say this within the context and a person who criticizes aspects of the civil service all the time. I mean, I do that all the time. But even though I do that, I understand the stability that of a well-functioning civil service that is not politicized plays in a small country like Barbados. So getting back to the statutory corporation and how they function, what happens in practice then is that there are many politicians who then expect the decisions of the board to be political. And that's a problem, especially with a national insurance fund, which they told me is my lifeline, and told every Barbadian, this is your lifeline. So this is a problem if it becomes politicized, whichever party is in power. So that's the thing about the statutory corporation. Then I go to the last recommendation, which was to ensure that where private projects seek public support, they give the NIS a choice to invest. So I immediately saw that as, like my view of a national insurance scheme is that, yes, it does invest because it wants to get a return on the money that we put into the fund. But there should be safe investments. The NIS should not be seen as the Enterprise Growth Fund or Fund Access. It's not that kind of fund. Those funds deal with entrepreneurs and deal with risky investments. I don't expect the NIS to do this. But then in this budgetary presentation, you had at point 4 that somehow the national insurance scheme is going to be seen as a place where you could go to get money for your private sector projects.
So hold
And I
a
don't
minute.
think it was intended to be that way.
Well, but
No,
Miss Eastman, let me just stop you there because I want to make sure that we understand this. Because after the voice note and I was taking the notes, I said, could they really be saying that? If you entrepreneurs who have ideas, that this would be a possibility of a way to take the people money and to put in some business venture, entrepreneurial idea. I mean, there's so much risk to that.
no. So I of course, I am interpreting this from the 4 points.
Yes.
But you will see it says, and that's why I read it, ensure that where private projects seek public support. Now, what kind of private project would seek public support? If one of the large companies in Barbados that we know wants to, for example, Old Simpson Motors wants to bring in a different type of vehicle or something, and they need to set up a new facility, we don't expect them to go to the NIS for that. But when you make that kind of statement, it suggests to me that you are clearing a path for people with their projects to come to the NIS, which projects could either succeed or fail.
Well, yeah. Wow.
Now, I mean, Caswell and Maxine probably know more than I do about the function of the NIS and its investments and that kind of thing. But to me that shocked me because I put the two things together. And then there's also the one of the other reforms is to diversify investment. And that sounds good. But then when people talk about diversifying investments, I kind of wonder what they mean, because I see the NIS fund as a fund that should be conservative in its investments.
Correct.
And then when you are going to talk about diversifying, what like diversifying into what? And well, the reason that I would be concerned as well is because I know that with the Four Seasons project, that NIS funds went into that.
Really?
And when you pass over
the four
project, you
season.
see nothing.
Listen,
You see nothing down there.
I'm not Bajan, so try and educate me, please. So I see somebody put a shock sign like me, exclamation here. So you're telling me the failed Four Season project, that NIS money was invested in that?
Yes. And there's no controversy about that. NIS funds were invested in that.
Listen, the people who are watching, you were aware of that? This is the money that we have given them to keep, and they're making these risky decisions. It's invested in it, and I mean, didn't they close that off? I will have to ask Miss McLean about that afterwards, because okay. I am go answer quickly.
No, I am saying that there's been a lot of discussion about that. And I think it is perhaps an opportunity for chat. I remember speaking to that on one of your programs some time ago. The reality was that the Four Seasons project, which started around 2006, 2005 or something like that, was seen to be a significant investment for the country. It was billed as that. And I will say this because I don't know I have enough time, and I like to speak from facts. But
right,
you know who would know a lot about that, because it spanned 2 administrations. It spans 3 administrations. That project started. I am a Black Rock girl, so I remember when that site was cleared, and I guess I call it a premonition, because I stood up there and I said to myself, because it was obviously like a open space, and I said, what if this thing doesn't pan out? But that started under a Noinatha administration. It continued under us when in 2007, 8, it ran into, well, 2006, 7, I think it was 7, it ran into trouble. The Professor Avinash Prasad would have been an advisor on that project. And I don't think it is a secret that the Prime Minister of Barbados, as she was then in opposition, was a legal advisor or something. So it's a project for which a lot of information is available. And I would want to be very careful as to what I said. National insurance money went in. There were debates in Parliament about it, certainly under when we were in office. I can go and pull my cabinet papers to look and see the details. And I think it is something we should speak to. Recently, of course, though, I was listening to some casting of that as to how and when it started to suggest that it probably occurred sometime between 2008 and 18. I will say this. If you do some research on national insurance funds, Lynette was very correct. In the same way that a commercial bank, and more so when it comes to pension funds, the trustees, we are trustees, we are custodians. I served as a director of a bank and my credit union, and I recognize that the monies that you hold in trust pension funds are particularly critical. And so you have to look at that. Now, there are rules right now which govern how national insurance funds can be invested. You need to go read the legislation, look at the investment committee, the rules that govern them. What Lynette referred to, and I was trying to pull up the budget from 2022 in terms of the suggestion of going forward. That, in fact, constitutes a major part of the legislation that was passed on Monday, on Friday evening, in the House. Because if you're talking about restructuring the national insurance scheme, putting it under a corporate arrangement completely, because Caswell spoke about the hybrid nature. When you look at putting that under that new arrangement, my question really and truly is, because I don't know what transpired outside of 2008 to 2018, but while the minister had power, a lot of the minister that served when I was Minister of Finance could not go off by himself and make a decision by himself. The decisions of the board might have been overridden, but it wasn't by a minister sitting by himself, because it was himself each time that I was around in those 10 years, would have come to cabinet and shared what was proposed. So when you now take that away, because I've heard Caswell say that we should move the minister and government away, but let me ask the question, who are you going to put there? Because what you're saying now is we're going to take power and put it in the hands of some persons. Let me use an analogy that my fellow credit union member can refer to. In recent times, we've been talking about the credit union. And people have been saying that, and I think people have been trying to encourage the financial service, the FSC, to go down, the Financial Services Commission, to go down this road, that credit unions should bring in independent directors, persons who probably don't even subscribe to the philosophy of the movement. So when you remove some of the controls that the current obtained in the current structures and put them in the hands of some totally independent body, who controls who becomes a director of NIS? And as you say, it may be a case where the government's change, people may decide they want to move the boards and so on. And so you see, unless we have dialogue and discussion about the implications of those changes, and quite interestingly, there was no discussion of this on Friday. And I could bet you, and I know, Marcia, you may not be a betting person, but I can bet anybody, and I can't bet you more than $100, that what's going to happen was that there's going to be, well, maybe I can't speak for the independents, but I can tell you that the government senators, only a handful of them will probably speak. Well, more may speak now that they've heard what we've been saying, but they would have gone in there, and within 2 or 3 hours, they would have been out of the Senate.
Out of there. And
no discussion. So I think what we just heard from Lynette has is part of the case that has to be made, that we need, as a country and as individuals who are current or future beneficiaries and so on, and who are stakeholders in this process, we need to have more discussion. Yes. What are you planning? Because what you were hearing, I mean, one of the ministers made reference to the IMF. Lynette just made reference to commitments or statements in a budget last year. And all of these things will form part of what actually
Part
happens
of, and
legislation.
this is why when I heard her voice note, I said, wow, this is really powerful. In fact, Lynette, you had 4 areas.
Marcia, I need very quickly to correct Kent Lee McCollin. I am not sure that the Auditor General said in his report it was never had not been audited in 20 years. I can tell you that in
I don't.
2008, it is not true. In 2008, what we found was a serious backlog of annual reports not being published. And I will say anybody can go and ask him directly. He's still a public servant. He's moved out in the NIS to tell us when there were significant delays, and because there were delays in getting those annual reports, but I wouldn't say it was not
It
audited.
wasn't what, so it wasn't. Okay. But I want to give, thank
So
you
that
for
that
that.
is that's
I
not
want to give
what I will say
Lynette,
though. Okay, go
I
ahead.
wanted
Sorry.
to let Lynette
Mhm.
just continue because she raised, I think there were 4 areas that you in this reform proposal that was presented, reform that was presented in August, and you dealt with, I think, 2 already. So
Yeah.
just, yeah.
No, 3. But I want to make the point that in terms of the Four Seasons project, I find that well, I'm able to do it, but maybe, you know, I'm able to do it, but I don't know if everybody's able to do it. But when I'm looking at an issue, I don't really be studying the dates and who was in power, because sometimes that distracts you from the point. The point is, and I heard this, I read this years ago from an Australian minister where the government had put in place far more restrictions than we have now in terms of the powers which ministers can exercise. And he said that ultimately he found it to be a good thing, because when people came to ask for favors, he could say, well, I can't do that because the legislation prevents me from doing it. So it isn't a matter of saying, well, I will see what I could do. I would talk to the prime minister, that kind of thing. All of that was out through the door because of the legislation that they put in place. Now, what that means then is that as a politician and a person who wants to be a member of parliament, you have to canvass on something other than promising people contracts and a job somewhere and all that. It has to be your abilities, whatever they are, that you then canvas on, not on the ability to do these things. And we continue to do that. We continue to run our economy based on favors. And I say to people all the time, it isn't that in other countries that you don't have privilege and you don't have privileged people and you don't have people who maybe get through certain things because of who they are. But it is not the means by which economic development is pursued. Because for many people in Barbados, in order for your business to be a success, it is absolutely necessary for you to make contact with a politician. So in many other countries, they're not run like that. The ones, if you want to look at the Human Development Index, you would see that the countries that are within the top 10 are also the countries who are at the top level in the Transparency Index, which means a lack of corruption. So I'm just looking, every politician who has the ability to look into that insurance scheme and see that there's a lot of money in it is going to be tempted to interfere with it. So we have to put measures in place to ensure that they're not tempted. So there are 4 things. The other thing was to recapitalize the national insurance scheme. Now, at that point in time, I did feel that it was going to be largely the ordinary people of Barbados who were going to ask to recapitalize the NIS. And that is what has happened. And you know, we in Barbados, and maybe middle class people don't want to hear this, but you know, we talk about the lower classes or the poor people, and then we elevate to this middle class. But the majority of people in Barbados live off of their monthly checks,
Your
Mm-hmm.
checks and
and you know, and they don't have a huge they don't have all these assets set aside as people may think. They're paying their mortgage, they're running their vehicle or two vehicles, they're sending their children to school. And you know, it isn't for the middle class, it isn't like the next generation doesn't have to work. That doesn't matter if the next generation works or if they do well or if they're bright. It matters because they, you know, it isn't that they can put their children in some kind of position that even if they aren't bright, that they will still get through. So you're talking about when you're talking about this, you're talking about the majority of Barbadians, probably like 90%. You're not talking about just 25% of the population when we're saying that ordinary people will be impacted significantly by this. So recapitalization of the NIS, yeah, that's a big thing. When I think about it, I heard Caswell talking about the fact that I don't remember the figure that he said about money being written off. There are people who owe the fund money. There's money that was, I would even go as far as to say, the money that was taken out and squandered by paying simply paying fees to individuals. Maybe those people should also be asked to put that money back into the NIS. Then there are all kinds of issues that we can look at where we spend money for certain things. Where we spend a lot of money, thousands of dollars to do certain things in Barbados, like hold facts and stuff like that, at the expense of the Barbados government. And don't let me just say the Barbados government, the people of Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody said in my conversation, our conversations today on Facebook, he said to me, I was talking about the contributions made by people, and he said to me that I'm joking, that the people don't really make any contributions, that most of the money comes from government. And so whose government? Is it that when you become a politician and you go into parliament or whatever, that somebody gives you a suitcase of money that you put under your bed that belongs to you and doesn't belong to the people of Barbados? All of the money that the government has belongs to us. We have a share in it. Every building that is supposedly owned by government, we have a share in it. So that whole idea about, oh, but the people don't put in money is a joke. The government supports the fund. It's our money. And I think that those are some of the things that we need to talk about more as well. So 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 those are the four items really: the
That's,
statutory
yeah.
corporation, the recapitalization of the NIS, the diversification into other investments, and basically to allow the private sector to get money from the NIS.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, thank you so
Martha,
much. Yes, yes,
could
jump
I,
right
could I
in.
just could I just comment on some things that Lynette said?
Yes.
And you know, one of the things she said that what she read, because it's not her thing, it's what she read. She said one of the goals was to make it corporatize the national insurance. All right, I'm hoping I got that correctly. And that's me making a corporate body. I'm reading from the 1966 legislation, but national insurance was passed under Arabara. This has remained unchanged to today. It says the board shall be a body corporate, having perpetual succession and a common seal. National insurance has always been a corporate body. The only difference between national insurance and other corporate bodies was that national insurance was forbidden by its own legislation to hire staff. And that's Section 11 of the National Insurance and Social Security Act. It says, I can read it to you because I'm not too far from it. Section 11 says, the minister shall, by order under Section 2 of the Civil Establishment Act, Cap 21, establish offices which shall constitute the offices of the board's establishment, which offices shall for all purposes be deemed to be offices in the public service. And Barra had a reason why he did that. He envisaged that the National Insurance Fund would grow tremendously. And he didn't want the board to concern itself with housekeeping matters. He wanted it to be to invest and do the things that the National Insurance want the board to do. Let the human resource or the so-called personnel people deal with personnel issues. So the only thing that this government has done now with this new legislation, the only thing new is to give the board the authority to hire staff.
Okay. Yeah, Caswell, I take that point. And the point that one of the points that I was that I wanted to examine, which maybe you can examine as well, is whether this gives scope now with statutory corporations. The statutory corporations are owned by the government. Legislation talks about a body corporate. Now, is there a possibility then that this body corporate, because the way it was done before, where the board becomes a body corporate, I don't believe that anybody could really have shares in it. Is there now a possibility that this body corporate, because it says it's a body corporate, that people can own shares in it?
That is up to the IMF. They're running the place, not us. Okay? It's as simple as that.
So you see, because when you are running a company and your main objective is for the shareholder to make money, that is different from when you are running an entity with a social mandate, if I put it that way.
I think you should have talked to the IMF. They won't let you talk to them. Because
no, they didn't ask me for a meeting. I don't know if they asked you.
No, they didn't ask me, you know. But that is what the IMF should be aware of. That is what they should know. That is what, but they go to the IMF with cap in hand and say yes sir, or yes ma'am, 3 bags full, and they do not put a case for Barbados. They are begging, so they don't put our good side. So when IMF asks you to get rid of certain things, I remember for all the years, every IMF consultation, the IMF wanted Barbados dollar devalued. No prime minister devalued it. None. Right? So because the rate on which the government pegs the Barbados dollar to the US dollar is fixed. So only the government can change it. And the government said no. We have a situation now where the IMF says we want these things done, and the government is going behind our backs to get it done because the IMF want it done. And they're not explaining it to us. They're not telling us what they need to do or what's happening to us. The IMF says civil servants should pay for their pensions, even though they were already paying. They may pay again. The government rushes to Parliament, I almost said in the dead of night, and take things to Parliament to satisfy what the IMF has asked them to do, without any consultation, really, with the people of this country that it will affect. It's not going to affect them, but meaning the MPs that sit down but I can't just sit down because they weren't there. I see Maxine conking them, and she count 12. I count so much, Maxine. I count 10, and I'm wondering if a person in the form of the General Secretary of BW was present, because this is a bill that affects every worker in this country. And I should have heard, but I don't listen to this. I must confess, I do not listen to the debate in the House because they don't ever collide with the topic that they're talking about. They talk all over the place, and not once do they get a glancing blow to the topic that is under discussion. So I avoid it because that thing irks me. When you hear them talking all kind of fancy things about what their constituents, but nothing about the bill because they have no substance. And they don't know what they're talking about, but they have to pass. And they have to do their master's, or in this case, mistress's bidding. Mistress say you want to pass this? And that is what I want the people to demonstrate their anger tomorrow, because she then can tell the Senate what to do.
Caswell, the point that you make about, you underlined it by saying that the IMF would come, and they've asked every prime minister to devalue the dollar, and no one ever did it. This is actually, I consider it to be a significant problem, not only in terms of what the IMF is asking, but in terms of what a number of organizations are asking us to do. And we're just passing the legislation to meet their requirements.
You're talking about the OECD.
The OECD, the Financial Action Task Force. I mean, I complain about it all the time. I think I'm a good corporate citizen, but by the time they finish, we will be so burdened with regulation that we won't be able to do any work. They're going to put Barbados out of business. But what I'm saying, the point that you make is about putting up some kind of resistance. I'm not saying that you're going to win on every point, but if you don't put up any resistance at all, it just encourages them to come with more. I also want to make the point that, remember, the Integrity in Public Life Bill has also been passed. So that is something that we have to look at. And I had a look at it, and because you see, even if you were going to make the NIS a body corporate, making it more independent of the civil service, government, and whatever, if you had the correct structures in place, then to the checks and balances with respect to that corporate body, but then there would be less to worry about. But we don't have those things in place either. So that's why the civil service, as it was structured many years ago, actually was doing Barbados a good service. Even though now most Barbadians are convinced, they've convinced themselves that, and they've been deliberately convinced by other people too, I believe, that it is not providing them with a good service.
That is because they want to be able to control the service and do what they want to do, like putting their people in place.